Hey everyone, today we're going to uncover a mysterious case that sent shockwaves through the US back in the 1990s. A serial killer who operated like a phantom, spreading terror across multiple states. He didn't just commit murders. He had the audacity to send taunting letters to courts and even the press. What makes it even creepier? Each letter came with a sketch of a sinister, smiling face, as if he was mocking the authorities' inability to catch him. This guy became known as the Smiling Killer. So who was he? And could the police finally uncover the truth behind these horrifying crimes? Let's turn back the clock together and travel to May 21st, 1990, to explore the chilling details. May 21st, 1990. It was a dreary Sunday. The sky above Portland, Oregon, was cloaked in a heavy gray haze, so oppressive it felt like it might come crashing down. Tanya Bennett, a 23-year-old college student, slipped into her raincoat, slung her bag over her shoulder, and stepped out of her house. She had plans to meet friends at a local bar, hoping to enjoy a few relaxing moments on the last night of her weekend. Tanya was a carefree young woman living with her mom in Portland. This city is famous for its distinct four seasons: wet and rainy winters, hot and dry summers. Portland's also called the City of Roses because its climate is perfect for growing those beautiful flowers. Another reason people love Portland? Its low crime rate. Tanya often hung out at bars, so her mom didn't worry much about her safety. But that night, Tanya didn't come home. At first, her mom didn't think much of it, assuming Tanya was having fun and stayed over at a friend's house, something that had happened before. But the next day, Tanya was still nowhere to be found. Her mom started to worry. A sinking feeling of dread began to take over. She quickly called Tanya's friends to figure out what was going on. One friend explained that the night before, Tanya had been drinking and playing beer games with a few strange men at the bar. Feeling bored, the friend left early, leaving Tanya to continue the party with those guys. After that, no one knew where Tanya went. Hearing this, Tanya's mom grew even more uneasy. A vague, creeping fear started to settle in her heart. Time dragged on. By May 23rd, Tanya had been missing for 2 full days. Meanwhile, a man driving along a highway near the Columbia River Gorge decided to pull over to take a quick break. As he stepped out of his car, he was horrified to spot a woman lying motionless in the bushes just off the road. Her eyes were wide open, her face deathly pale. It was clear she was dead. The horrifying scene left the man frozen in shock. Once he regained his composure, he immediately called the police. After receiving the report, police rushed to the scene. They set up a perimeter and began their investigation. The victim was a young woman, wearing a red long-sleeve shirt, jeans, and sneakers. Her right arm was raised, and there was a deep ligature mark around her neck. The autopsy later revealed multiple injuries on her body, signs of physical abuse, and evidence of sexual assault before her death. The official cause of death was strangulation, and the time of death was estimated to be about 2 days prior. The victim's identity was still unknown. At the scene, police couldn't find the murder weapon or any items that could identify her. The only clue was a piece of torn fabric from her jeans. Several signs indicated this wasn't the primary crime scene. The killer likely murdered her elsewhere and dumped her body here to hide it. Since the area was remote with no surveillance cameras, there were barely any useful leads to work with. The investigation hit a major roadblock. The case made headlines across media outlets, with police publicly asking for tips from the community. Tanya's mom, watching the news on TV, felt a wave of dread wash over her. The clothes described on the victim matched exactly what Tanya had been wearing. She hurriedly contacted the police. After identifying the body, it was confirmed. The victim was indeed Tanya Bennett, 23 years old. Tanya was known as an outgoing girl who loved making friends. Based on the info from Tanya's mom, the last place she'd been that night was a bar near Interstate 5. Tanya's friend confirmed she'd seen her playing beer games with a few strange men. Police tracked down the friend, who explained that on the evening of May 21st, they'd been drinking together at the bar. A few guys approached them, inviting them to play beer pong. Tanya agreed, but the friend got bored and left early, leaving Tanya to keep having fun with the group. Little did she know that after she left, Tanya would meet a tragic fate. Let's take a look at the map. Here's the bar where Tanya disappeared, and here's where her body was found. The two locations are 74 kilometers apart, a pretty significant distance. Police visited the bar and questioned the staff. Some employees remembered seeing Tanya leave the bar with a tall, burly man after the drinking game, but they couldn't make out his face. All they recalled was his height, estimating him to be around 6 feet 6 inches. Since the bar didn't have security cameras, the investigation stalled. Police issued a public notice, hoping to get leads from potential witnesses. But even after more than a week, they hadn't received any valuable information. 13 days after the murder, the investigation finally saw a breakthrough. Police received an anonymous call from a woman who claimed she knew who killed Tanya. She named the suspect, John Solovsky. The police were skeptical about this tip, but decided to look into John anyway. Their research showed that John, 39 years old, had been arrested multiple times for driving under the influence in recent years. He didn't have a steady job and had a bad reputation in the area. During the investigation, the anonymous woman called 2 more times, repeatedly urging the police to arrest John as soon as possible. Under pressure, she finally revealed her identity. She was Lavender Z, 58 years old, John's current live-in girlfriend. Lavender had been married twice before, but both of her husbands had passed away due to illness. She told the police that John was a monster who bragged to her about abducting Tanya at a rest stop on Interstate 5 in Portland. He then took Tanya to a historical site called Vista House, a place often used by travelers as a temporary rest spot in the evening. The area was usually deserted at night. That's where John assaulted Tanya and then strangled her to death with a cord. Afterward, he drove to the Columbia River Gorge and dumped her body in the roadside bushes. Lavender even provided the police with a piece of paper that had Tanya's name written on it, along with a few cryptic words. The handwriting on the paper closely resembled John's. The police immediately tracked down John for questioning. However, he adamantly insisted he was innocent and claimed that everything was a fabrication by his girlfriend. He then agreed to take a lie detector test at the police's request. During the test, when asked questions related to Tanya, his heart rate and breathing spiked noticeably. The results indicated he wasn't being truthful. However, legally, lie detector results are only considered for reference and aren't admissible as evidence. Due to a lack of concrete proof, the police were forced to release John. After that, Lavender provided another crucial piece of evidence, a torn piece of fabric. She claimed it was a piece that John had ripped from Tanya's jeans as a trophy. The police examined the fabric and noticed that its shape and size seemed to match the torn section on Tanya's jeans. They sent the fabric to the lab for further analysis. Meanwhile, the police secretly wired Lavender with a recording device, hoping she could get John to reveal more about Tanya's murder during their conversations. But John was cunning. He didn't admit to anything. Not long after, the lab results came back. The fabric Lavender provided didn't match the fabric from Tanya's jeans. Now, Lavender was suspected of fabricating evidence. Despite this, the police still considered John the primary suspect. But as the investigation continued, they couldn't find any solid evidence to pin him down. During this time, the police stumbled upon the real reason Lavender accused John. Their relationship was filled with violence. John often got drunk and beat Lavender. She'd tried to break up with him multiple times, but John refused to let her go. It's possible Lavender wanted to end the relationship for good by framing John for Tanya's murder. There was also a suspicious detail in Lavender's statement. She claimed the last place Tanya was seen was at a rest stop on Interstate 5. This seemed odd because, according to the bar staff, Tanya had left with a tall, burly man, but that man wasn't John. Seeing that the police weren't taking action, Lavender dropped a bombshell. She confessed to being involved in Tanya's murder herself. According to her new statement on the night of the murder, she and John were parked at a rest stop on Interstate 5 in Portland when they happened to run into Tanya, a beautiful young woman. John took the initiative to strike up a conversation with her. After chatting for a while, John offered to drive Tanya home, and Tanya agreed without hesitation. Both of them got into the car together. On the way, John developed sinister intentions and drove straight to Vista House. At first, Lavender thought John was just joking and wanted to scare the young girl a bit. But things quickly spiraled out of control. John dragged Tanya inside Vista House and assaulted her. Lavender stood by and witnessed the whole thing. After the assault, Tanya broke down, threatening to report them to the police. Hearing this, John flew into a rage and strangled Tanya with a cord. Lavender, terrified, stood frozen. John ordered her to come over and help him. Fearing for her life, Lavender complied until Tanya stopped breathing. After that, the two of them carried Tanya's body, stuffed it into the trunk of the car, drove to the Columbia River Gorge, and dumped her body in the roadside bushes. To verify this statement, the police took Lavender to the site where Tanya's body was found and asked her to point out the exact location. The result was astonishing. Lavender pointed to the precise spot. Following this, the police arrested both Lavender and her boyfriend John on murder charges. They searched their car but found no traces of Tanya. Lavender explained that they had wrapped Tanya's body in a towel and later tossed the towel by the roadside, which is why there were no traces in the car. The police went to the location Lavender described to search for the towel, but they found nothing. News of the arrests quickly spread, making headlines across various media outlets. People were especially shocked and started heated discussions about Lavender, a middle-aged woman with a gentle appearance, yet capable of committing such a heinous crime with her boyfriend. A year after the murder, during a pre-trial hearing, Lavender pleaded guilty and recounted the entire process of the crime. It's worth noting that at the time, Oregon still had the death penalty. However, during the official trial, Lavender suddenly changed her plea, declaring herself not guilty. This dramatic reversal stunned both the judge and the jury. Lavender claimed that all her previous confessions were fabricated with the sole purpose of escaping John's relentless abuse. She explained that John frequently abused her, and she couldn't bear it anymore. After seeing news about Tanya's death on TV, she came up with the idea to frame John so he'd be locked up. She made anonymous calls to the police, imitated John's handwriting to forge the note with Tanya's name and those cryptic words, and later, feeling it wasn't convincing enough, she fabricated more evidence. She remembered the torn fabric on Tanya's jeans from TV and newspaper reports. She closely studied its size and shape, then found an old pair of jeans belonging to her niece that had a similar material. She cut a piece from those jeans and handed it over to the police as fake evidence. However, even after all this, the police still hadn't arrested John. So, Lavender decided to take a bigger risk. She claimed she was also involved in the murder. She believed this statement would leave the police with no choice but to act. But now, standing in court and facing the possibility of life in prison, Lavender began to feel fear and regret. The police believed her new statement wasn't credible. She had confessed multiple times and even accurately pointed out the location of Tanya's body. Her sudden change of story was clearly an attempt to evade responsibility. After a lengthy trial, the jury reached a unanimous decision. The court declared the defendant, Lavender, guilty of first-degree murder. Lavender was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Shortly after, John's trial began. He continued to plead his innocence. However, upon learning that his girlfriend Lavender had been convicted, he realized he couldn't escape the law's punishment. Following his lawyer's advice, John changed his strategy and opted for a no-contest plea, a legal defense where the defendant neither admits nor denies the charges, but simply doesn't fight the accusations. In criminal cases, courts often treat a no-contest plea as equivalent to a guilty plea, but it can sometimes lead to a lighter sentence. The police agreed to this plea deal. In the end, John was sentenced to life in prison, but was eligible for parole after 15 years, narrowly escaping the death penalty. With both of them behind bars, the police thought the case was finally closed. But they had no idea that the real challenge was just beginning. In May 1991, a strange incident occurred in Montana. Inside the bathroom of a truck stop, someone had discovered graffiti related to Tanya's case. Someone had written on the wall, claiming they were the real killer of Tanya. Next to the words was a drawing of a smiling face, as if mocking the police's inability to solve the case. Montana police immediately contacted the Oregon authorities. Both sides initially thought it was just a sick prank by someone trying to stir up attention. Tanya's case had caused a huge stir in the media, so maybe this person was just capitalizing on the notoriety. A single piece of graffiti wasn't enough to prove anything. Time passed. In May 1994, 4 years after Tanya's murder, a court in Oregon received an anonymous handwritten letter. The writer, in a taunting tone, claimed to be the true killer behind Tanya's murder. The letter described the crime in detail. Through handwriting analysis, the police confirmed that the writing in the letter matched the graffiti found in the Montana truck stop bathroom 3 years earlier. What's more, this letter also ended with a drawing of a smiling face. This caught the police's attention. A short while later, a newspaper in Montana received a similar letter, also anonymous. This letter didn't just mention Tanya, it described the body dump sites of 6 other women. The author even hinted that he might turn himself in at any moment. The newspaper immediately reported the matter to the police. After investigating, the police discovered that the locations mentioned in the letter were indeed the crime scenes of several unsolved murders, cold cases that had stumped authorities. The media quickly picked up the story, dubbing this mysterious figure the Smiling Killer. At first, people treated it as a bizarre tale, But when the police announced that the smiling killer might be a serial killer, the public began to panic. A simple symbol like a smiling face, something that used to represent innocence and joy, had now become the hallmark of a serial killer, spreading fear across the nation. The pressure mounted on the police. With a lack of leads, the investigation saw no major breakthroughs for a long time. It wasn't until a year later that the case took a sudden turn. In May 1995, the body of Julie Windingham, 41 years old, was discovered in a patch of bushes in the Columbia River Gorge. The victim was naked and had been deceased for some time. Police sealed off the scene, but they couldn't find any significant clues. This wasn't the primary crime scene either. The autopsy revealed that the victim had been sexually assaulted before her death. There were traces of duct tape on her face and neck, indicating she'd been gagged with tape. The cause of death was strangulation. Julie's mother recalled that about 2 weeks earlier, early one morning, her daughter had brought a tall, burly man home. The man introduced himself as Chris, a truck driver. Julie told her mom that the two of them were dating and even planning to get married. But after that, Chris never came back to their house, and soon after, Julie disappeared, until the police came knocking. Julie's case reminded the police of Tanya's murder 5 years earlier. Tanya had also been abducted by a tall, burly man. Coincidentally, the bodies of both women were found near the Columbia River Gorge. This led the police to suspect that the man named Chris might be the real culprit. Through their investigation, the police discovered that Julie had sold her car at a used car market before her disappearance, and the buyer was none other than Chris, her boyfriend. The police obtained the sales contract between the two, but the buyer's name wasn't Chris. It was Keith Hunter, a 40-year-old Canadian truck driver working for a transportation company. He frequently traveled across different states, with no fixed whereabouts. Keith was a hard worker with no prior criminal record. His height was striking, standing at 6 feet 6 inches. Not wanting to alert the suspect without solid evidence, the police discreetly contacted the transportation company where Keith worked. They learned he was currently in Chicago, with his next destination being New Mexico. The police immediately headed to New Mexico to intercept him. When Keith saw the police, he looked utterly shocked. His face turned pale. They brought him in for questioning and collected a DNA sample. The interrogation lasted 5 hours. Keith admitted to having a romantic relationship with Julie, but he said their relationship wasn't stable. They frequently argued over small things. The last time he saw Julie was over 2 weeks ago. They were sitting in his truck when they got into a heated argument about some trivial matter. Julie insisted on getting out of the truck, and he reluctantly agreed. After that, Julie walked off, and they lost contact. Since he was busy with work, he didn't reach out to her either. Although Keith tried to dismiss any suspicions about himself, the police noticed something odd in his statement. Keith seemed completely indifferent to Julie's disappearance. He didn't ask about her situation at all, as if he were talking about a complete stranger. With no hard evidence, the police had to let Keith go after the interrogation. Before he left, one of the officers handed him a business card with a phone number and said with a pointed tone, "Give me a call within a week. By then, we'll either clear you from our suspect list or we'll focus our investigation on you." The officer's words had an effect. A few days later, Keith called the officer, but he only said one brief sentence. "You're right. I want to confess." Then he hung up. Before reaching out to the police, Keith had gone through a long internal struggle, even considering doing something drastic. But in the end, he decided to turn himself in, hoping for leniency. However, Keith still hadn't fully confessed to the details of the crime, including the crime scene, his motive, or other specifics of the case. The police suspected he might have killed Julie inside his truck. Although the person responsible for Julie's death had been identified, there was still no conclusion on whether Keith was the smiling killer. While awaiting trial, the police advised Keith to contact his family and inform them of the situation, warning that sooner or later they'd learn about his crimes through the media. It's believed that Keith wrote a letter to his brother. Upon learning of this, the police immediately intercepted the letter. After examining it, they found that the letter mentioned a total of 8 victims. The first victim was Tanya, killed in 1990. The last was Julie. In between, there were 6 other women who had also been murdered. These 6 women were the same ones the smiling killer had mentioned in the letters sent to the court and the newspaper earlier. The police had already obtained DNA samples from those letters and compared them to Keith's DNA. The results were a perfect match. It turned out that all those taunting letters were written by Keith. There was no doubt about it. He was the smiling killer the police had been hunting all along. Facing undeniable evidence, Keith finally confessed to all of his crimes. He had committed murders all over the country. The 6 other victims came from different states as well. The news of the smiling killer's arrest spread rapidly across the nation. People immediately thought of Lavender and John, the couple who had been wrongfully convicted in Tanya's case and were serving life sentences. At this point, they had already been in prison for 4 years. Public outrage erupted, demanding their release. Finally, under societal pressure, in January 1996, the court overturned the convictions of Lavender and John. Both were set free. Lavender's family burst into tears when they reunited with her as she walked out of prison. By then, she was 64 years old, her hair completely white. When a reporter asked her how she, if she wasn't the killer, was able to pinpoint the exact location of Tanya's body, Lavender replied, "I studied all the details of the case through the media, newspapers and TV. When they took me to the scene, I noticed an area of bushes that had been cleared. I figured that must have been where the police worked during their investigation, so I pointed to that spot." Keith, the real killer, after confessing, admitted that after killing Tanya, he noticed that all the attention from the police and media had turned to Lavender and John. These two were clearly unrelated to the crime, yet they were getting all the focus, while he, the actual killer, was completely ignored. This made him feel resentful. So he started drawing graffiti on the truck stop bathroom wall and sent letters to the court and media, all with the goal of drawing attention back to himself. This confession left everyone stunned. Even after committing such crimes, he still craved the spotlight, a truly twisted mindset that's hard to comprehend. Keith's path to crime can be traced back to his upbringing. Keith was born in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, Canada. He had 2 older brothers and 2 sisters. His father was a violent alcoholic, and his mother was a passive housewife. From a young age, Keith was mocked by his siblings for his large stature. His father saw him as a burden, often beating him. Keith was the only child in the family who was close to his mother. Growing up in such a dysfunctional household, Keith became withdrawn and deeply insecure. Later, his family moved to Washington, U.S. Because of his oversized frame, Keith struggled to make friends at school. He was constantly bullied by his peers, who nicknamed him Ogre to mock his unusual appearance. Over time, Keith began to show a disturbing tendency. He started torturing animals. He enjoyed locking 2 small animals in a cage and watching them fight to the death. Instead of stopping him, his father would clap and cheer him on. At the age of 10, Keith befriended a boy named Martin, the only friend he ever had. The two often got into trouble together. Martin was a mischievous kid who always started trouble and then blamed Keith for it. This led to frequent fights between them. At just 10 years old, Keith once threatened to kill Martin. A year later, while they were swimming, Keith seized the opportunity to hold Martin's head underwater. No matter how much Martin struggled, Keith wouldn't let go. It wasn't until a lifeguard noticed and pulled them apart that a tragedy was narrowly avoided. These incidents show that even as a child, Keith displayed an aggressive and controlling nature that was far from normal. During his conversations with the police, Keith was very articulate, speaking fluently without any apparent flaws. He looked the police in the eye, sometimes even cracking jokes. Keith told the police that when he was 14, he was sexually assaulted by someone he knew, but he didn't dare speak up because he feared no one would believe him. After graduating high school, Keith quickly got married and had 3 children with his wife. To support his family, he took up a job as a truck driver. It seemed like his life might settle into a peaceful routine, but that wasn't the case. A strange woman called his wife, leading her to suspect Keith of infidelity. This caused tension in their marriage. In 1990, the couple divorced, and their 3 children stayed with their mother. Keith continued his job as a truck driver, traveling across the country. He soon realized that this job provided the perfect cover for his crimes. With no family ties holding him back, Keith began to let loose. In 1990, at the age of 35, Keith met Tanya, a young and beautiful woman, at a bar in Portland, Oregon. He played beer pong with her, then lured her back to his motel room, where he assaulted her. An argument broke out between them, and Keith strangled her to death with a cord. He dumped Tanya's body in roadside bushes, threw her bag, umbrella, and other belongings into a river, and then left Oregon. This was Keith's first kill, and it left him both nervous and exhilarated. The feeling was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, bringing him an intense sense of satisfaction. Not long after, Keith watched the news on TV and learned that Tanya's body had been discovered. But what shocked him was that the suspects weren't him. This made him feel humiliated. He was the real killer, yet someone else was stealing all the attention. At the time, he was in Montana, so he scribbled graffiti on a truck stop bathroom wall to try to draw attention back to himself. But the police barely paid it any mind. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. He then sent 2 more letters, one to the court and one to the media, each accompanied by a smiling face, drawing to mock their incompetence. After his first kill, Keith became bolder. Over the next few years, he went on to murder 6 more women in states like Washington, California, Florida, and beyond, using similar tactics. His victims were often people on the fringes of society, mostly prostitutes who wouldn't be missed. Because of this, their disappearances didn't attract much attention. It wasn't until 1995, when the body of Julie, his final victim, was discovered, that the police began to suspect Keith. From 1990 to 1995, over the course of 5 years, Keith had killed a total of 8 women. He knew that sooner or later the police would catch up to him, and he had prepared himself for that moment. But he felt no remorse for what he'd done. In fact, it gave him a sense of accomplishment. Now, the name Smiling Killer was widely known. Everyone was talking about him, which was exactly what he wanted. 5 years after the case broke, Keith began facing trials in multiple states. In the end, he was sentenced to 4 life terms and is currently imprisoned in a state prison in Oregon. While serving his sentence, Keith gave an interview to a reporter. Shockingly, he claimed to the reporter that he had killed 160 people. However, without evidence, the validity of this claim remains unverified. Many believe he was exaggerating the truth, likely to gain more public attention. This aligns perfectly with his attention-seeking personality. The story of the smiling killer, Keith Jeff Vernon, comes to an end here. From a child who was abused and ostracized, Keith turned into a monster who terrorized society. His journey of crime serves as a grim reminder of the dark side of human nature, the consequences of family violence, and the indifference of society. This case also highlights the importance of thorough investigations to avoid wrongful convictions, like in the case of Lavender and John. Although Keith has been brought to justice, the pain he inflicted on his victims and their families will linger forever. The story of the smiling killer leaves us with much to reflect on, about human nature, about justice, and about the tragedies of life. That's all for today's video. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.